Hello, welcome to our discussion on public speaking. In today's video, we're going to talk about what public speaking is, the importance of being informative before you're persuasive in a speech presentation, if you do end up doing persuasive speeches, speech organization, how to use visual aids effectively, and verbal and nonverbal delivery. Now, this video is essentially going to be a condensed version of public speaking, sort of a crash course in public speaking. Obviously, you can take full courses on this subject, and so we're just kind of going over some of the main tentpole things that you need to keep in mind. So, what is public speaking? Public speaking is what's called a conversational style of speaking. So, this is creating a presentation that's personable. In other words, if you think of a conversation, right, where you're not scripted, right? You're just talking off the top of your head with whatever input you can have on a given subject, right? That's what you want it to feel like with you being the presenter, right? You want people to feel like it's not scripted. You're saying things that you want to say and believe in, right? Without some sort of pre-canned agenda per se, right? And so when we say it's a conversational style of speaking, what we're really talking about is if you think about it, just imagine you're in a conversation. It should feel that natural, right? I mean, essentially, this is a conversation with your audience. It's just more one way. You're doing most of the talking and loudly, right? But it should feel very authentic. Now, why does that matter? So sometimes, learning's remembering. And what that means is we you kind of already know these things, but maybe you haven't thought about them in this context. But like, look at it this way. How do you feel when people approach you and they're very rehearsed? Like everything is canned. You walk into a store and you're gonna outfit your car with a new new sound system, right? And the clerk walks up to you and they say, "Welcome to Ed's House of Music, where the only returns we accept are smiles. How can I earn your business today?" Right? You walk into my office, you're a client. I say, "Welcome, welcome to, the Bryan Law Firm, where it's not just us, it's justice." Right? I give you the line. Do you think that Steve in Ed's House of Music really cares about selling you the best sound system or car stereo for you? If you're a lawyer, if that's one of the first things they say to you, it's not just about us, it's justice. They give you the little wink, right? When people are really canned, how do you feel? Do you think they really care? Do you think they're really looking out for your best interests? Probably not, right? Somebody's hitting on you. I don't know. They use a pickup line. I'm socially retired. I don't know how you kids, when you commingle, how you interact, but they use a can line, whatever a can line is. I don't know some good ones. But do you feel like that person really cares about you when they're like that smooth about it and you know it's a line? Probably not, right? Unless it's a really good line, you're probably not impressed. So whenever you feel like somebody is too rehearsed, you feel like it's not authentic. They don't really believe in what they're saying, right? They don't even believe what they're selling. And so that basically turns people off, right? It turns them away. And so one of the first things you want to do with public speaking is learn that you need to sound sincere. It needs to sound authentic in the moment, even if it is a speech where a lot of it is rehearsed, right? Even if this is something you have said before a million times, right? Like, I could be standing before a jury and talking about a concept that I've had to talk about that concept, and I've had to talk. I'm talking about contributory negligence, which is this concept of you sue somebody for negligence, but if you're negligent too, right, like that can maybe mitigate some of the blame and also some of the damages, right? So if I've been explaining contributory negligence, a lot of those elements, my way of explaining that to a jury is pretty much going to be the same, right? And but I still need it to come across as sincere because if I get up there and I say, "You must award my client so many millions of dollars because after all, if you don't, it is the greatest travesty that the legal system will have ever seen. This cannot stand." Turn the page. Continue reading, right? You're not going to think if you're on that jury that this is a travesty of justice because I'm so canned and rehearsed, right? So even in those scenarios where it is something that is pre-canned, I still say it in a way that sounds authentic in the moment. So that's the first thing about public speaking. This isn't the same thing as what you might get taught in some other formats of speaking like an where maybe it is more rehearsed and every little tone of voice change and movement is rehearsed, right? You don't that's a little bit different, and there's certain contexts where maybe being more rehearsed is necessary and important, but with public speaking it needs to sound as authentic as possible so people believe that you believe what you're selling, that you're sincere, right? I've mentioned in other videos that there's this concept with persuasion that people love to buy, they hate to be sold. And what that means is they're willing to be persuaded, but they want to feel like whoever they're talking to, whoever they're giving, in this case, a speech, right? Whoever's giving them that information actually believes what they're saying and cares about their best interests, right? Is being truthful and honest and authentic with them. So, in other words, they don't want to be sold the snake oil. They're willing to be convinced. They're willing to listen to your message as long as they feel you're sincere. So that's the first thing with public speaking. It's a conversational style of speaking. There are types of presentations, obviously, and again, I'm giving you the very condensed version of this. But what you have is essentially informative versus persuasive presentations. So, informative presentations is information where you're just trying to create an awareness of a topic, right? That like you're trying to either explain something. If it doesn't necessarily require a lot of explanation, maybe you're just like discussing something because you're like, hey, you should care about this. But that's what being informative is. It's just giving information, right? It's like I'm just describing the duck to you. You should care about the duck. I'm not necessarily telling you what you should think about it. I'm not telling you if the duck's good or bad, right? I'm just telling you it's a duck, right? So informative is not necessarily trying to tell people what plan of action to take. It's trying to get them to understand or know about a topic, right? Or if there's any kind of level of action, it's basically that you should want to learn more about this topic. Now, what I have here is not necessarily a definition, more so much it's the key thing to think of when you're being informative, right? If you want to get people to listen to you and care about your topic and your message, what you need to basically do is brainstorm on that topic. What is new information, and new meaning not known to that audience, right? Now sometimes the basics are not known to that audience and you got to go over the basics, but sometimes that audience, a lot of times in real world settings, they do have some understanding or familiarity with the topic, so you're going to have to go over new stuff besides the basics. But the question is, have you actually sat down and brainstormed that, right? What's new information? What's information that's maybe known but applied in a different context? Have they maybe not thought about it as applied in this situation or setting that I want them to know about or care about, right? Clarifying understanding of a topic, right? So again, it's just a brainstorming list of things you want to do, but without, again, advocating for a position. So that's what you're doing when you're being informative. And again, why does this matter? I've used this example before where a client comes into my office and let's say this is a domestic relations case, which is essentially family law. They want to get divorced and they say, I need a divorce attorney. I've got two kids. I want custody. There you go. Would kind of like to keep the house. If the first thing I say to them, because I haven't brainstormed what's new, what's misunderstood, right? What's something they haven't maybe considered, uh, is the first thing, let's say the first, I haven't thought about that, and I just tell them, I just give them the basics. I'm like, yeah, you could get divorced. Might have to pay child support. Do you think that's going to make, and then I say, all right, it's going to be $300 an hour, right? I mean, and they're like, whoa, that's a lot, right? Do you think that's going to make somebody want to pay me 300, $400? I don't know, lawyers are expensive. Do you think that's going to make them want to like pay me a bunch of like hundreds, bunch of hundies per hour to take the case? Probably, they're, at one level they're like, well, I need a lawyer, and they might do it, but they're certainly now they're going to be a little hesitant to do it. Now, why? Because they're going to sit there and go, well, thank you, Captain Obvious. I have Google. I know I can get divorced. Like I don't have to stay married, and I get it that might have to pay child support if I don't get custody. Have I told them anything useful to them? No, they already know that. They can Google that. So that's not what I do. Every case I have, I've already brainstormed. What's new? What do people not understand? Right? What can I clarify? So in this case, first thing I say is, have you moved out? Like, yeah, moved out. Got my own apartment. Kids stay there. It's easier for them. They're going to the same school. Didn't want to disrupt their lives. And then I say, bad move. Bad move. Can you move back in? Can you get the kids to move in with you in your apartment? Um, why is that a bad move? Well, they don't know, right? So then I tell them the new information. I tell them stuff that maybe they don't understand, right? And I say, well, here's the problem. It's not that courts favor mom or dad. Does mom usually get custody? Yeah, but it's not because she's mom. You know why mom usually gets custody? is because courts favor what's called the primary caregiver, which is means who do the kids live with, who's taking them to school, wiping the runny noses, fixing the lunches, right? Doing the day to day parenting. Okay. When you move out, you have now, and you don't take the kids, you have made yourself not the primary caregiver. So you've hurt your custody case, right? Now that's something they probably don't know because they've never heard the term primary caregiver. Caregiver. Have you ever heard the phrase "you don't know what you don't know"? Has anybody ever heard that? By the way, that's something that's important to keep in mind in life. In the age where everybody thinks they can just Google their way out of everything, aka a lot of students do that. They think I can just Google all the answers. Well, you can't Google all the answers when you don't even know what to Google. You got, right? You've probably never heard the term primary caregiver when you're doing your like divorce by yourself, right? You don't know what you don't know, and so you're going to screw up, right? If you don't do the real work, right, to learn or to hire the professional. And so I lead with that because if I immediately drop the bomb of, hey, dude, I bet you didn't know about this, right? And I've done this in all the types of cases I have. Um, and so now why do I do that? Because then when you hear that, you're more likely to go, well, crap, I better hire a lawyer, right? Like these are things I haven't thought of. Okay. And again, like I said, I have brainstormed this in every kind of case, criminal case, estate plannings, wills and trusts, where like stuff that I can like right away start to talk about that gives them information about things where they start to go, these are things I haven't thought about, right? Because I don't know what I don't know. So always lead with information like that. It gets people's attention. They're going to pay attention, right? And listen to what you're saying. So that's what you want to focus on. You're being informative. Now, persuasion is basically motivating someone to change an attitude or a behavior, right? And so these are speeches where you are trying to get one of those changes. Now, sometimes it's not always change. Like, in other words, sometimes you're trying to persuade people to continue their, to maintain the status quo, whether that's an attitude or behavior. So, but I guess the way to think of it is directing an action, right? You're basically saying maintain or change a behavior, maintain or change an attitude, right? But you're trying to you're telling them what to do, right? Essentially, whether it's changing the status quo or not. That's what persuasion essentially is. So you're giving them the call to action. Now, in the real world, I think what happens is oftentimes we're just being persuasive most of the time. I think we're being persuasive way more than people like to like acknowledge or realize. Now, why do I say that? So certainly in job settings, and certainly if you're going to do presentations, most presentations are job work related. So you're being persuasive, right? You're trying to sell a product or service or yourself, and in yourself in the sense that you're credible, and I'm somebody you should listen to, right? Or you should consume content from me. So you're always being persuasive in that sense. But again, I mention this when I teach like classes on interpersonal communication and other types of settings. We're persuasive in our personal lives too, a lot of times with almost everything we say. Like again, think about it. Your parents ask you how class is going, how's school going, how's work going. Your girlfriend asks you, your boyfriend, your friends, I don't know, the parents of your significant other ask you, how's work? Do you not you answer the question and it doesn't mean you're not honest, but do you not frame the answer in a way that makes you look good, in a way that makes you look the best? Of course you do, right? Because you don't want to look bad. So of course you're gonna like frame it a little bit. So we're always kind of like sometimes this gets referred to in other classes as like identity management or face work. You may have heard those terms where you say things, you present things in a way that maintains a certain level of like respect for yourself. It doesn't make you look bad, right? So I think we're persuasive in interpersonal settings. Now that's the difference between the two. The real big tentpole thing, like from 30,000 feet, that you need to keep in mind is that you should always be informed before you're persuasive, even if you're going to be persuasive. You know, in a class, we tend to separate informative speeches and persuasive speeches so you know the difference between the two, even though in the real world you're typically persuasive. But guess what? Even when you're going to be persuasive, you always be informative first. Now, why should you? Because again, people love to buy, they hate to be sold. So, in other words, you're willing to be persuaded, but I don't want to feel like I'm getting taken advantage of. When you walk into Best Buy, you know that Best Buy is not a nonprofit. They're there to sell you stuff, they're there to make money. But you still want to feel like what you buy on Best Buy was like worth it. Like when you go in there to buy a new, um, I don't know, your new PlayStation, your new 8K TV. I'm not sure why you're buying that because you're probably not watching stuff in 8K, right? Do you have the hookups for that? You got the cords? You buying the physical media? I digress. I'm going down a rabbit hole. But anyway, you want to feel like, hey, you got use out of what you bought, right? So you're willing to like exchange money for goods and services. They get something out of it, but you want to get something out of it too, and you don't want to feel like you're getting taken advantage of, right? You don't want to go to Best Buy and pay double. And so here's we want to feel like, in other words, that the decisions we make are logical and rational, and we're still the right decision. And it's hard for people to feel that way if you're just hard sell, hard sell, hard sell, aka persuasion all the time. So you should always lay a foundation first. So again, go back to that situation where like a client comes to my office. This is why even when I start out with like, well, primary caregiver, or I'm telling them something that maybe they haven't thought about, I do not immediately say, well, this is what it costs to hire, because that's going to turn people off. What I do is I give them a bunch of information before I get to the persuasion part. Will you hire me? So, what I typically do is I listen to what they have to say. I ask them some initial questions about what kind of outcome are they seeking, right? And then I basically say what your options are, man. And you got a lot of options. You could do nothing. You could just not engage the legal system, just do nothing, right? What other options do you have? You could hire somebody cheaper than me. You could hire a paralegal or to just do the documents for you. They don't represent you in court, but they do all the paperwork. Or even some attorneys will even do that. You can go to legal aid services, pro bono services, those type of like reduced cost referral services that are cheaper. Then I talk about, and I haven't mentioned a number. I just say they're cheaper. And I'll talk about like, here's some people similarly priced to me, and then here's some people more expensive to me, and here's what you're getting with that, right? Like, here's the pros and cons. Like, there's people that are more expensive than me, but they've also been, they've forgotten more law than I'll ever know, and they've been doing this for 2 decades long, right? And here's like the pros and cons of that. And once I've gone through all of that, so yeah, you fully understand what your options are, and sort of the potential consequences and pros and cons of each one, I will then say, so here's what I charge. And I will even give them the business cards. I'm like, you want to call legal aid? Here you go. Don't just take it from me, right? Here's some of those places I mentioned. Feel free to give them a call. Take your time. How's your pal? Now, why do I do that? Because I have now been informative this whole time, essentially. I've given you all this information that is helpful to you, regardless of if you choose the outcome that's helpful to me, which is you hire me, before I was persuasive. So now, do you think that I'm more trustworthy? Yeah. You're more likely to think, hey man, this guy makes money if I hire him, but he's not just looking out for himself. He's treating me fairly because he's telling me, right, what my options are, including other places I could go that are cheaper. And now you're more likely to trust me, and you're going to feel more comfortable hiring me, right? So be informed before you're persuasive. If you want to see the inverse, again, learning's remembering. You know this stuff. You've experienced this in life. You maybe just haven't thought about it this way. So another like example of like being informative versus persuasive being important, and why if you're just persuasive it turns people away, turns people off. Think of the YouTube ads. Like if you have not paid for um YouTube ad free, I'm not sure. That's becoming essential. Um my God, should I be saying this when I'm posting this on YouTube? Maybe not. Like the ads. Okay, so those YouTube ads, when they pop on and the ads are like, "Do you want to know?" It's like the 25-year-old. I don't know why I'm talking like this, by the way. Guy goes, "Do you want to know how to make money in the new economy?" Right? He's on his own private island, right? He's there with his girlfriend, Miss Smoke Show. Um, and he goes, "Do you know it's not by selling physical products on Amazon? It is through Amazon's other company, Audible." Right? And he like burns an Amazon package. He's like, I made 20,000 last week and I worked 7.5 hours. Okay. Or there's somebody else who comes on and they're like, uh, why aren't you making money right now in real estate with other people's money? Well, stay tuned because I'm going to show you how. And then there's the other guy. He comes on, he's on the treadmill. You seen this guy? He's like super fit. He just looks great. I'm jelly, right? Well, I'm not just I'm jelly. That's not what I'm saying. This wasn't self-defeating. I'm saying jelly as in jealous. I think that's what the kids say, the cool kids. I don't know. I always learn about the cool kid stuff because again, I'm socially retired. Um, And so I'm not interacting. I'm almost living my life like I'm in one of the zombie movies. Like I'm in what was the one with Will Smith? That was a good one. I like that one. Um, that's kind of me, right? I'm just walking around. But anyway, so I find out what the cool kids are saying like 2 3 years later. So there's a definite delay for me. So I don't know if you guys are saying jelly to mean jealous anymore, but that's what I meant. But like, so this guy's on the treadmill and he just looks great. He's like super fit. He's like a fitness model. He's got the great hair. A lot of it's the hair, man. You got to have great hair. Timothy Chalamet, it's the hair. That's what's doing it. Take away the hair, I'm not sure, right? It's the hair, people. But anyway, so um, uh, like he'll come on. He's on the treadmill and he's like eating a donut. And he's like, "This does not make you fat," and just eats the donut. And there's another one where he's like lifting weights and he's just eating pizza, the meat lover special. He's like, "This does not make you fat," right? Um, so these ads come on, and if you're like 99.9% of the audience, you just immediately click away from them the minute you can hit skip. Now, why is that? Why didn't you start making money the best way in the new economy? Why did I hit skip instead of listening to that guy? Because I'd like to not be fat. I'd like to lose weight. Because you're probably like me and you immediately go, this is too good to be true. It's bull, right? Like if it like that can't be real, right? For a lot of red flags are coming up. Like you're probably thinking, first of all, you should be thinking if you had the secret to like generational wealth and financial abundance that required very little work and was so easy, why would you tell other people the secret? Because if enough people are doing it, you're not gonna be able to make as much money doing it. Like, why would you just give it away, right? So you know it's too good to be true and you click away. So what turns this, it's like old, I mean, infomercials are like this. I mean, I know you guys don't watch a lot of those anymore, but older people remember them. And it's the same thing where they are just hard sell persuasion all the time. They walk in the room and they're like, I can give you the moon and the stars, and it's really super easy. That immediately turns you off and you're like, click away because they're just being overly persuasive. Where you're like, you're just selling me the snake oil. This is not legit. It's a con, it's a scam, right? And so you've experienced this already, and that's kind of what's going on. It's because they didn't lay any foundation. They didn't give you a reason to believe that this is legitimate, and that's why that turns most people off. Now, by the way, as a side note, dealing just with persuasion and like psychology of people, you might be saying, well, if that doesn't work, why do they have those ads? Because they're not going for the average person, right? They know that 99.9% of people will just hit skip. What are they going for? They're going for the 1% that for some reason won't, the half of 1%, or people that are financially desperate, right? And so people that are predisposed for, so some people are financially desperate, right? So they're gonna try these things, take more chances. There are people that are psychologically predisposed to fall for these things. So for example, if you're just lazy and don't want to do the work, right? You might just jump around from con to con because at the end of the day, you just want some quick, easy turnkey fix. This happens with like diet and weight loss plans. Why does it work? Because everybody wants a quick, easy fix, and it doesn't work. It's not easy. Like if we're going to use weight loss as an example, it's one of the hardest things to do. Like think about it. If you need to lose weight and want to lose weight, and we're talking about losing a significant amount of weight, if you do it, you've accomplished something that just statistically is very extraordinary because it's really hard to do. Just think of how many people that want to do that and don't do it. Like you're a pretty elite person to have accomplished that, right? It's not easy. So people oftentimes there's people that are just psychologically looking for easy outs. They just don't want to do the work. Like, things in life are hard, man. If you like these things that we all want, and if you want them, you got to be willing to do the work that it takes to get them. At the end of the day, okay? And if you're not, that's why you don't have them a lot of times. So, but like, so people will sometimes, there's those people who are going to fall for this stuff. Or for some reason, they want the quick out. They're desperate. They're financially desperate. So just, especially the get rich quick things, they will fall for that. They have some sort of blind spot that's making them fall for that. Another example, by the way, if you again, you've seen this in other situations in life, just kind of real quick to wrap up this point. Like, let's take romance scams. You guys seen these romance scams that happen now? This happens with a lot of cons, by the way. So I mentioned they have some psychological principles to why they fall for it. Well, most cons, if you think of like cons like the Bernie Madoffs, people steal a lot of money, or these romance scams, ultimately what the con artist does, what the scammer does, is take advantage of some bad trait in the victim. Like we all like to talk about how awful the scammers are, and yeah, the scammers are awful people. To just take people's hard-earned money and life savings, and if we're talking about a romance scam, or catfish scam, like play with their emotions. Like, yeah, they're awful people, but they're also finding victims who have faults of their own, and that they're actually targeting, right? Are psychologically predisposed. So here's what I mean by that. Think about it. Um, if you've ever seen these catfish things, or like you watch these romance scam video, I mean, there's a lot of those on YouTube, for example, and the person's like, they're not real, I can't believe it, and they took all this money, and I was just trying to help them, and I was just trying to find love, and they show the person that they were catfishing them as, right? So like a lot of times it's guys that fall for these, so I'll just use these gender sort of like this context. So like the guy gets scammed, and then they show the girl, and on a scale of 1 to 10, she's a 15 in looks. She's just like a model. She's like a top less than 1% of beauty in the world. Uh, so, and there were all kinds of red flags, right? The girl couldn't video call with him. The girl wouldn't meet him, even though she claims to only live a couple hours away, right? All of these red flags is that this could be a scam. Why did he ignore those? Because she's hot, and he really wanted this to work because she's hot. You know that. This isn't rocket science. So he was blinded by the fact that she's so hot that he was just willing to overlook all the red flags, right? That's somebody who's going to fall for this because of their own shallowness. So I remember I said scammers take advantage of traits in the victim, like that are bad. Even though the scammers are bad, they look for people that have these like blind spots. Well, there you go. I mean, 95% of these romance scams that, I've seen them as an attorney, I've seen them just like heard some of these stories and watched some of these videos. It's overwhelmingly, it's more than 95%. The dude's shallow, and he overlooked it all because she's a model, right? That's a lot of what this is. And I've seen it vice versa. The girl's shallow and she overlooked it because, by the way, girls do this too, because he's a model, right? This happens in financial cons. Like, guess what? The people that steal a lot of money from people, you know what they look for? Victims that are greedy, because they can walk in the room and go, "Hey, man, I can give you a 50% return on your investment in 6 months." Right? If you invest in this, and people are so blinded by, ooh, I want a 50% return on my money in 6 months, that they don't do any homework, any research on the story that person's telling you, or more aptly told, selling you, and they don't do their homework, and they don't see all of the holes in their story that you could just, it's like Swiss cheese, you could drive a Mack truck through it, right? But the victim's greedy, and so they fall for the con. So financial cons, it's victims greed. Romance scams, it's shallowness of the victims, right? And so that's why they do these things, because they're going for people that have those faults or those blind spots, and they can catch those, right? Or there's also people that are just naive. It's kind of like when you get all these scams you hear about, email scams and text scams, and you're like, and you just immediately delete them. You're like, who would, and you block them. You're like, who would fall for this? Well, there's that 1% that does, for a variety of reasons. But anyway, the average person does not fall for it. Sorry, that was maybe too long of a rant on the topic. But the average person doesn't fall for that because you're not being informed before you're persuasive, and they want you to, so they feel like they're making logical, rational decisions. All right, so we're going to talk now about some components of public speaking, how to use them effectively, specifically um, build your speech organization and your visual aids, and then we'll talk about, so this is substance, and then we're going to talk about style, which is delivery. So let's talk about substance and organization. So why does organization matter? Why do we care about it in public speaking? It aids content understanding and retention. If you're organized, people are more likely to understand what the heck you're talking about and also remember it. And also, when I say understand, what I also mean, it's not just like literal understanding. It means knowing what the big things are. What's really important? What's the main point? Right? There's this phrase in communication, or you've probably maybe heard this in psychology: keep the main thing the main thing. In other words, do you get people focused on what matters, the main points? And organization can help you emphasize that. This is what matters, right? Let's see what's important here. It builds speaker and topic credibility, and it helps you direct the scope of the conversation. So building speaker and topic credibility just means is that there's research with audiences, and this isn't just with speeches. This is with audiences that consume any information content. So this includes like audiences that regularly subscribe, download, and listen to podcasts, or subscribe and watch YouTube videos and watch the whole video. And you do studies on these audiences, whether it's questions or focus groups. And if the speaker is organized or the creator of that YouTube content is organized, the audience will then perceive that the topic is more legitimate. So think of like if what I'm basically saying is like, let's say a YouTube video is well produced, people are more likely to think it's truthful, right? So if you're organized and it's organized, right? If it's well produced and organized, basically audiences are more likely to think the topic is credible, the information is credible, and they're more likely to think you're credible. So I mentioned before, there's a difference between like maybe it depends on what other videos you've seen, but like I've talked about how, and you might have heard this talked about in other courses, but there's a difference between like speaker and topic credibility. Speaker credibility is well, topic credibility is do you think the topic matters, right? Is this worthwhile information to you? Speaker credibility is do I think you're the one that knows about it? You're the one who should be telling me this, right? You're the one who's the right person to deliver this. And so when you're organized, audiences believe that you're credible and that your topic's credible. They just give you the benefit of the doubt. By the way, that should be maybe a little concerning because that's basically saying style over substance, right? If you just look like you're put together and doing this in an orderly fashion, we're more likely to just believe the content's legitimate. Okay. This works better with like that factor works more with if the audience is less familiar with the topic, so they don't really know if you screw up, right? Audiences that are really well versed in a topic, you can be slick Rick and be really organized, but that's not necessarily going to fool them because they know the topic, right? It also directs the scope of the conversation, which means it allows you to focus on what you're going to discuss. So with all topics, there's like a broad range of what you can discuss. If you're organized, it allows you to walk in there and go, all right, we're talking about this corner up here, right? And that can be useful for time purposes or just like strategic purposes. Okay, so a speech basically has three large tentpole components. You have an introduction, a conclusion, and the body of your speech. And again, I'm giving you the condensed version in this discussion. So I'm trying to just give you the major tent poles, major things to focus on. So an introduction should have an attention getter slash motivational link. It should establish credibility in the speaker and the topic, usually again in the introduction, so early on, and a thesis statement. And generally, you want this is true for conclusions. You want your intro and conclusion to be about 10% of a speech. So to make the math simple, let's say you have a 10-minute presentation that's only a minute. So you don't want to get like super bogged down in your intro. Now there's some leeway here, but for like for example, if you have a topic that the audience isn't very familiar with, maybe you got to spend more time introducing it. But for the most part, you don't want to get bogged down too much in introduction. So those are basically the components. Now, credibility, I just talked about, right? Like that's establishing some kind of credibility that they should listen to you, right? And that could be done either by talking about your experience early on, your credentials, or just some reason you're passionate about it. Like sometimes you don't have experience, but you can just talk about why you're passionate about it. Or credibility in the topic, if it's in the topic. If it's a topic that the audience just simply is not used to really caring about or being invested in, then you maybe need to emphasize that in your intro. Now, some topics you obviously don't have to. Now, attention getter versus motivational link. Now, attention getter is just like it sounds. It's like, hey, you should care, right? And you could do like, excuse me. I mean, you could have a statistic or a quote or some like anecdote, a story, right? There's lots of ways to grab attention. The big thing you need to remember about attention getters is that they should always, and this is what a motivational link actually is. A motivational link is what's their motivation to care. So it's basically attention getter, but like repackaged. It's renamed a different way. Motivational link is meant to like remind you you want to create the motivation for them to care, right? Or take action if it's being persuasive. But here's what really matters about this. You want to be really good at this, right? The people that are like okay at public speaking and persuasion versus the people that are like super badass and awesome is the motivational link slash attention getter needs to be why your audience should care about the topic. Wait for it. Here's the important part right now. It is not good enough that it's just like why they should care. That's not good enough. So in other words, there's some misnomers out there when it comes to persuasion and business. People are like, well, the product sells itself. build it and they will come. Okay, that's all BS. That's not true. And you already know that. Okay, you don't have to take a college class to know that. Build it and they will come. Why is that not true? Well, here's why that's not true. We've all seen, like, take a franchise of a restaurant or establishment where it succeeds in one location and it fails in another. Well, I thought build it and they will come. It sells itself. Why did it fail? Well, it failed because location matters, right? If you're not in a convenient location, a location with buyers that desire that product or service, it doesn't matter that it's something there's people want to buy because those people are, you're not where the fish are. You're not fishing where the fish are, so it ain't gonna happen, right? Location matters, right? And so one of the things about attention getters is if you just like walk in the room and you're like, well, you should care about this, you're making a big assumption, and you're kind of making this similar to like build it and they will come or the product sells itself assumption. And the assumption what you're making there is if you just have an attention getter motivational link that is why you should care and that's it, and not create a sense of urgency, which is the right now part, is you're basically assuming that people do what they know is good for them. They don't. First of all, so people oftentimes do things they know are counter to their own interests. Not only is it not good for them, it's bad for them. Well, they do it all the time. Some of you like I do that 10 times a day, maybe 12. But like, people do not. So it doesn't sell itself. It's sort of like if I come in now. Why do they not do that? For a variety of reasons. A lot of times it's because they think they have what's called runway, meaning they have like someday, someday, someday. Yeah, I know I should, but this isn't the perfect time, so I'll do that later, right? So it's sort of like if I'm giving a speech and I come in the room and I'm like, you should drink more water, right? And I start chucking free Aquafinas at you because I went to Costco and I got like the big bulk buy. Is that going to make you drink more water? No, right? If you already drink water, you might, but a lot of you are going to be like, thanks. Uh, but especially if you're young, it's a college audience. You're like, I got all the time in the world to worry about my health, right? You're gonna open a Red Bull while I'm talking, right? If you're me, you're just gonna keep drinking the Diet Coke. That's not an endorsement for Diet Coke. Don't. I just have a Diet Coke problem. Okay. Don't. You probably shouldn't be drinking this. It's probably bad. Um, look up aspartame. It's probably not good. But anyway, like you're gonna think, well, I got all the time in the world to worry about this. This isn't gonna necessarily make me drink more water, right? Like people do not do things that they know they should all the time. Like most people can't go one day always doing the right thing, doing the things that they know they should for a variety of reasons. And so you can't do that. You have to. It's basically become someday, 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 and you can't. First of all, if that was good enough, they'd already be doing what you're trying to persuade them to do. Clearly they haven't, because that's why you're talking to them. So that means it just being the right thing clearly isn't persuasive enough. You've got to create a sense of urgency. Like, why should you do this right now? And the way to do that is you got to type to something that they care about today, whatever that may be. It could be money. It could be, there are situations where it is health, but like you've got to create a sense of urgency with your motivational link. That's the big tentpole thing. What is a thesis statement? It's one sentence that previews your topic and your main points of your presentation. So an example would be you say, today we'll examine the obesity epidemic. That's my topic. We'll look at its likely causes, implications for our health, and available solutions. Those are your three main points. So this is a preview. This ends your speech. This is something that tells your audience what to focus on, and it gives a cue to them. Sorry, ends your introduction. Gives a cue to them that your intro is ending. This is something that is called signposting, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which you might have heard of if you've taken other public speaking classes. Conclusions. We're going to talk about the body of a speech in a second, but I want to talk about intros and conclusions together because they kind of mirror each other. So, in some respects, so a conclusion, you want to start with a review statement. So, this is your thesis statement in past tense. So, it's one sentence that reviews your topic and your main points. So, today we talked about topic one. More specifically, we talked about A, B, and C, right? Your motivational link, if you haven't gone back to it throughout the speech, go back to why they should care right now, right? They shouldn't wait for someday. Okay, someday leads to the town of nowhere. I think I left that quote out earlier, so I'll bring it up now. Right? You gotta explain to them. Right? Go back to that motivational link. Why? No, not someday. Do it today. Do it tomorrow. And then a really important thing that people tend to leave out is explain where to go for more information or how to take that first action step. So explaining where to go for more information just helps you. If you're being informative, it just helps you come across as more credible. If you're being persuasive, you're giving them that first action step, because we know research into persuasion in psychology says that people are more likely to follow through something if they take a step right away in furtherance of the action of the goal or whatever the mindset they've set. So it's sort of like there's lots of people every year that they set a New Year's resolution in January, right? And one of the most common ones is they're going to lose weight or get healthy, and some of those people go out and get a gym membership. Now, there's plenty of people that go out and get a gym membership in January and they don't follow through at all. Okay, but that being said, if you did go out and get a gym membership, you are more likely to follow through than the people that didn't, because you took an action right away. That's one of the things that we know about research with that. So that's why you want to tell them to do that. And again, this should be 10% of your speech. Now, the body of your speech, your main points, generally, there's something called the rule of three or the rule of four. You only want to have about 3 to 4 main points, barring some topics and certain exceptions. I mean, sometimes I'm giving a speech to a jury, I'm giving a closing argument, and I got more main points than that because there's more key witnesses or key pieces of information. But for the most part, I'm going to keep it down to 3 or 4 because it's harder for people to it's just easier for people to kind of remember when things are grouped in 3 or 4. To like, you don't want information overload. There's only so many concepts they can juggle at once. So that's why you want to keep it to 3 or 4. Okay. Use an organizational pattern. I'm just going to talk about a couple real quick here, but this is just having a rhyme or reason for how you organize your main points, and then appropriately arrange supporting material. And what I mean by that is balance your evidence. So, in other words, don't have a bunch of sources and arguments and validation points for your first like 2 main points and none for your third. And also avoid strings of similar evidence. What do I mean by that? Is people are more likely to believe things if they're proved in more than one way. So if you think of like arguments, there's like 3 types of arguments, right? So Aristotle's three proofs, if you've heard of that, right? So Aristotle, old guy, in like the 1980s, he came up with these 3 proofs. And it was you've got logos, ethos, pathos. So it was a fabulous time in the 80s. Um, I might have the decade wrong. I'm not a history major, so I might have that wrong. Although the 80s was awesome. You kids watching this, if I reference a movie past 2000, you're like, is it color? Was it in color? You're like, you don't know it. And I've mentioned this in other videos, so maybe you've already heard this, but like, come on, guys, go back. There's a lot of great stuff in the 80s and 90s. Movies, music, you gotta check it out. Um, but anyway, the 3 proofs, like appeals to logic, appeals to emotion, appeals to credibility. If you can use evidence, like all 3 types of evidence, people are just more likely to believe it. It's you can argue this isn't shouldn't be true, but we have this natural instinct to, if we see, for just from a psychological standpoint, if I see things proved in multiple ways, I'm more likely to believe it. So an example would be if I have a stat that's like, this is what happened to little Jimmy, isn't that terrible? You may believe that. That may be good enough for you. But if I also have like the story about you see little Jimmy, it's like, it's true. I'm little Jimmy and it happened to me, right? Or I've got the story about how it happened to little Kimmy too. You're more likely to believe it because now I have a stat and an emotional appeal, right? So add more types of evidence. Organizational patterns. Again, if you take some more formal training in public speaking in a class, they'll talk about all these different ones and some cool like persuasion ones, but I'm just going to go over these are just some couple basic ones. You kind of know the idea. So chronological would be like in sequential order. This happened, then this happened, and this happened. I will oftentimes use that for opening statements. Spatial is by location. So that you're very rarely going to use that. That's more for like historical things, but you're like just talking about sort of the landscape of things, right? The geography, so to speak. Cause and effect is really common. A cause B, right? Or problem solution would be another one. And then topical is by believed importance. So this is a catch-all. So an example of this would be, let's say you have several arguments and there's that question of, do you lead with your strongest argument and go from there, or do you lead with your weakest and build up to your strongest argument, right? And there's different opinions on that. Like that's not necessarily a right or wrong. You can make arguments either way. I personally think that if it is a topic that the audience is probably already on your side or slightly bought into, so you're kind of preaching to the choir, for lack of a better phrase, then I think it's okay to kind of like start with maybe middle, not necessarily your weakest, but like middle. It's okay to end with your strongest, right? And you can have those other points build up to that because they're probably already kind of bought in, right? Or they're likely to say yes to whatever you're trying to persuade them to. If it's an audience where it's a topic you're trying to get them to care about or pay attention to, and they generally haven't, then I'm kind of the opinion of, well, then hit them with that strong argument right away, to kind of wake them up, right? And so, again, there's not a right or wrong for that, but that's also something to consider. But generally, the point is just have a strategy here, right? When you're organizing your main points. Okay, visual aids. Again, we're going fast. Very condensed version of this, a crash course version essentially. Visual aids. Why do they matter? They can make content more digestible. This is basically just you're keen in. You're taking advantage of people are visual learners, right? And you've probably heard this phrase that we have all these different, there's all these different learning styles, and some people tend to be more suited to one or the other. It's like there's people in a class who actually like teachers that lecture, so I guess they would love me, um, because if they hear it, they'll remember it. I actually am like that in school or just in general. If I hear it, I'll generally remember it. Um, and there's also people that if they see it, they're more visual learners, right? There's people that are more hands-on learners if they do it, right? And they're also good with those types of jobs and fields. And other people are not like that. Like I for example, have no, I struggle. I can't build, like for me, building a bookcase is a massive thing. It's very difficult. It's like I've tried to build them, and it was very concerning. My not only how the project turned out on that bookcase, but how long it took me, right? And as it went on, I continued to beat myself up and say, I guess allegedly a member of the same species that has sent man to the moon. Um, but I can't build this bookcase, right? So I just struggle. I got an older brother. He was great at building. He could build. So the gene passed me. My dad was a carpenter. I got nothing. I got no skills that way. Some people I would say I'm lacking a lot of skills. All right, but anyway, so some people are visual learners, and by the way, the whole thing about the learning thing is, it, just because you're more suited to one type of learning doesn't mean you can't learn the other ways. Like we can all learn every way. It's just that some tend to like gravitate towards one or the other, or tend to be like more comfortable with one or the other, right? So in other words, everybody, it helps them if they see something reinforced visually, and that's what visual aids are doing. They can improve message retention because of that. It helps memory because you saw it, right? Not only did you hear it, but you saw it in a speech, right? And it can aid your delivery. And that's actually what I'm going to focus on. When I teach the full public speaking class, I talk about how everything in your speech can be used to cheat. And what I mean by that is make you look better, like actually make you look smoother. Okay. And that's everything from how you prepare your speech, how you interact with your audience, how you use signposts, which we'll talk about in a little bit. All of this stuff can be used to make you look like you're naturally a better presenter than maybe you actually really are. You're just highly skilled in technique, right? And visual aids can be used a lot that way. So that's kind of what I'm going to focus on, because not only does it help with your delivery, but that's how you should be using your visual aids anyway. So a couple of key things to consider. They should be easy to see and understand. You want to save any handouts for the end of your presentation. And there's three types of visual aids: explanatory, supplemental, and filler. So easy to see and understand. That is because visual aids are always a supplement to the presentation. They should not drive the bus. You're the show. The eyes should be on you. Good song, by the way, if you know it. Um, um, Eyes on Me. That's the song. Um, you're the show here. Um, Jeremy Remy. That's who does the song. All right. Sorry, getting distracted. Um, you want people to focus on you, pay attention to you. The visual aids just supplement it. If the visual aids are complex and difficult to understand, they're gonna be focusing on that and not paying attention to you over here, right? And you want them paying attention to you. It's the same reason you save handouts to the end, because you don't want them to be distracted looking at handouts, your business card, or in the real world, it's oftentimes a project plan or a business proposal. You save that to the end; they can look at that later. The three types of visual aids: so filler, explanatory, supplemental. What filler visual aids are visual aids related to your topic, but they don't actually provide any information. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of that in a second. Explanatory visual aids are things that actually explain what you're talking about, and then supplemental are additional examples of what you're talking about. So they're adding extra things on. Okay, so an example of this would be if you were prospective students at a college, you were thinking of attending that college. And let's say that college had a nursing program. So in nursing programs, they will have built into like part of you getting your degree, you're required to do what are called clinicals, which are essentially internships. And oftentimes colleges will already have agreements with local hospitals or institutions for their students to do their clinical work at a given site. So let's say I was talking to you guys at a given school and I was trying to convince you to come to college here, join our nursing program, and I was talking about clinical sites. A filler visual aid would be just a random image, stock image in the back of students like walking and smiling with coffee, right? Underneath the clock tower, the grassy hill, right? Or the cool classroom. Um, that would be a filler visual aid because it's not really telling you anything about the nursing program or the college, right? But it's related. It's something you expect to see. Like think about it. If you go on any college's website, these are the kinds of images you expect to see. An explanatory visual aid would be if I'm talking about how, hey, we have clinical sites at Hospital X, and then there's an image in the back of Hospital X. That would be explaining what I'm talking about, right? That's explanatory. And then supplemental would be maybe, yeah, I'm talking about Hospital X, but I also then show you some images of other hospitals, right? They're extra supplements, extra examples. So those are the three types, first of all. Now, one of the things I will say right off the bat is when you're doing visual aids, you want to do your visual aids last. So, in other words, you want to wait to know all of the content in your speech and then you do them. Why is that? It's because then you want to use your visual aids to create a visual outline. So, what you do is once you know your content, you then, first of all, you have a list. You don't have to like think about it. What should my visual aids be? You got a list to go from. You have marching orders. Okay, you have directions. First thing you do is you pick a visual aid that introduces for the introduction. What's a good visual aid for the introduction? And this is actually where oftentimes the filler image is, the filler visual aid. One for your conclusion, also again, a hotspot for filler, and then one for each main point. Your first main point, your second main point, your third main point. So there you have five. If you need more, you can go to your supplemental points. Like, have like if you think of an outline, you have one A, B, two A, B. Then you go to A and B. So whatever the specific things you talk about within the main point, maybe you can come up with some visual aids for that are mostly explanatory or supplemental, primarily explanatory, right? And now, why are you doing this? Two reasons. One is you're giving the audience a visual roadmap, which reinforces your speech organization, which then makes them think you're more credible, which we talked about, and also helps them remember things. Second reason is it helps you look smoother. What a great public speaker you are. Now, why is this? What's one of the biggest things that people are worried about with public speaking that can happen to them? What can go wrong? Well, I lose my place, I forget. You freeze. Now, if you freeze, you got a couple of things. What do you have at your disposal when you freeze? You got your brain, which has failed you yet again. You've got your note cards, and you can look at those, try to get your place back, and you have your visual aids because the audience ain't going to help you. So those are your two options now: are note cards or visual aids. Now you can look at your note cards and read them and try to figure out where you are. But you know what's faster than that, and also less obvious that you've lost your place, is if you can just look right back at your visual aid. Oh yeah, like so if I look back and there's an image of the hospital that the college that I'm at has a clinical site agreement with, it's going to be pretty easy for me to remember I was talking about clinical sites because there's a picture of the clinical site. And it doesn't look like I lost my place because you just think I'm referring to the visual aid, right? So in other words, and don't take this literally, essentially you're turning your visual aids into note cards. Now, should your visual aids be note cards? No, I don't mean that literally. Aggregators. I don't think people are aggregating speech content. You're busy aggregating sports podcasts, things like that. I don't know, clickbait headlines. Um, but like, I don't mean literally, because obviously, if you're sitting there reading your note cards, the audience is going to tune out because it'll be like, well, great, I could read that. What do I need you for, right? Like, that's not helpful. But what I mean is, the visual aid should be able to act as note cards if you lose your place. You should be able to look back. Like, you may have heard this, like, sometimes when people teach public speaking, they will say, somebody who's never heard your speech should be able to look at your visual aids and understand what the topic is and main points are at least, right? Well, if that is true, almost every public speaking teacher is going to say that. Well, if that's true, that means you as the presenter should be able to do that too. And if you can do that too, they're kind of note cards for you. So if you do this the right way, where you have explanatory and supplemental visual aids and limit the filler, You know what you've done? You've created note cards that are subtle. It's hiding in plain sight, and that's how you can kind of give a speech with note cards without having any note cards, pretty easily, right? And so that's basically what you do. Now, a couple things. Now, what you want to avoid is having filler, right? Because the filler don't help you. If I lose my place, and I was talking about clinical sites, and I look back and there's an image of the cool classroom, right? Or the teacher giving the aha look. They always show the classroom with like the four students. It's really intimate. They're all just gathered around in a circle, and they have the cool looking teacher in his blazer. He's got the like, so he's the silver fox beard, and he's doing the like, oh, I'm what an insightful response he's giving that student. I actually haven't given a student that look in like 7 years. Fun fact. So I don't know. You're not getting it from me. But anyway, uh, they show the cool classroom, or it's the cool clock tower, or it's stock image of five happy students wearing their university logo sweater. If I look back and that image is there, filler, that's not gonna help me remember anything, right? And so the mistake people make is a lot. Remember, I said do this last if you know their content. Here's what a lot of people who aren't trained do. They get bored in the middle of their speech and like, I'm gonna get on Google Images and just start like finding some random images related to my speech. That's how you end up with filler. And filler just doesn't help you. Now, I did say that it's okay to use filler in the intro and the conclusion. That is because oftentimes you probably practice the intro the most a lot of times. And that's actually a good little pro tip with practice. I don't talk about that much in this video, but when you practice a speech, you do want to practice the intro a lot. And that's because your anxiety, your nervousness in public speaking, usually it's the highest at the beginning of the speech. So it'll go down as you're giving the presentation. So if you can start off well, if that the first 45 seconds can go well, 30 seconds, then usually it's a snowball effect of positivity and everything else goes well. So you should practice the intro a lot. So you're just less likely to screw up the intro. And same thing with the conclusion. By then, you've made it that far through the speech. You've been talking about this topic now for 5, 10 minutes. You probably are going to land the conclusion. So it's okay. It's safer to have filler in there. So let me show you an example of this, like in action. So this was in a class where this wasn't a public speaking class. It was a unique course where students were learning about how to give like sales presentations and pitches specifically, and they were randomly assigned to various businesses to try to convince people to either open a franchise for or start this business, right? So this person got Starbucks. So their first main point is they were talking about how Starbucks varies the menu by season and that people purchase more cold and healthy beverages in the summer and hot and sugary drinks in the winter. And then they started to talk about how Starbucks at the time would sell these Evolution Fresh items. So the point of this is if you vary the menu, you can also then maximize your profits, right? And they're aware of that research. And so this person is taught while they're talking about this, they show you this image here of these Evolution smoothies that Starbucks was selling at the time. Okay. So this is explanatory. This is what they're talking about. So if you lose your place while you're talking about this, you can look back and see organic green devotion, defense up. Some would say this is just Gatorade, but it's just sugar water. I'm not sure how healthy these are, um, but anyway, you look back at this. This is going to help remind you. Oh yeah, I was talking about how the menu varies, and you could vary and specific items you can sell by season because here are these summer items, right? Now, what would be filler if you just had the random Starbucks logo, the girl waving her arms or whatever's happening there, right? Or the stock image of people happily drinking coffee, okay? That's not going to help you. So this is explanatory. By the way, what would be supplemental would be this slide. So the extra example, supplemental here, where let's say, well, and again, you actually wouldn't even have to mention this. You don't have to even mention all the supplementals. Or sometimes you can just say, and here's some extra examples, and that's all you say. Because this is self-explanatory, right? I'm assuming that when people see the word crisp peppermint mocha, gingerbread latte, Christmas latte, they know we're talking about what you sell in December, right? Because that's probably when people are buying these things. Some of you like these are all year round, buddy. Uh, so it's very self-explanatory. So that's supplemental. It's adding an extra example. Now, why? By the way, why does? And again, if you lose your place, this is a great note card. You're gonna look back and see the word Christmas. It's gonna be cluing into you. Oh yeah, I was talking about the menu items by season, right? And by the way, so why would you be supplemental? Why add the extra stuff in? Well, it is a way to essentially add more valuable content for your audience, which makes you stand out from your competition, right? Because you had more examples, you had more content, right? And so that's basically what you're trying to do with that. So those are the three types of visual aids. A couple of things to keep in mind with presentations is you want to have a cover slide, a presentation preview, and a concluding slide. You want to use a maximum of 4 to 5 points per slide. So in other words, that's like bullets. Don't have like a bunch of paragraphs and things like that. Try not to go through more than 2 slides per minute. Avoid long paragraphs of information. Again, that's going to take away from the presentation. You don't want to be like reading a whole paragraph up there. Now, there's some exceptions to this. You're taking you're in your chemistry class, your biology class. The assumption is you don't know much about the topic. They got to explain more, right? Like that's slightly different. But unless you're dealing with an audience that really doesn't know a lot about it, which isn't the case. Usually the audience kind of knows something, or they know enough to where you can avoid the paragraphs. Generally, you want to avoid the paragraphs. Use consistent fonts, color schemes, and animations. Don't use too many. There's research on this that shows this is why if you've taken marketing classes, for example, they talk about logos and design that they tend to keep it simple and consistent with 2 3 colors and things like that, and fonts, and because there's research that shows it kind of turns people away. They don't like it when it's all crazy like that. It's a million colors and a million fonts. There's even research this on e-commerce that people don't like that. They're less likely to stay on a site, to click on links, buy things. So you just want to kind of avoid that stuff. Um, so people just don't like being around a lot of that consistently. It doesn't mean we don't like a bunch of colors and don't buy things that are, crazy fonts or all this stuff like we do. But it's like, there's people that buy a tie-dye shirt, but they don't wear that shirt every day. And they're not always looking at their own tie-dye shirt, right? So you get the burst of it, but you're not like totally engulfed in it. So don't do that with your visual aids where they're constantly staring at things like that. And another real world thing is save stuff online or to a flash drive. And first of all, for you youngins out there, um, I know you're just using the cloud for everything. Like, what would you do if the internet went down one day? Like, just what do you do? Does your world just fall apart? You can't watch anything. You have no music. Like, what do you do? It doesn't happen to me because I have like hard copies and stuff. But I mean, you guys. I mean, uh, um, you got it. You can't. Here's my point about this. You got to have a hard copy backed up. You can't say in a real situation, well, I can't give my presentation. Tell the investors I'll meet them next week because the internet's down. My connection's bad, right? You better have a hard copy. So make sure that's just like life advice, right? Probably a good idea. Um, and to actually do that. So just saying, right? Like back it up, man, because I can't fail to give a. I can't like file a motion. Let's delay the trial because the courthouse's Wi-Fi is down, right? Like you need to have physical copies and learn how to save them and all that sort of stuff. All right, couple of things about charts and graphs to keep in mind. Last little note here about visual aids is title and label variables. So make sure you title and label everything on the chart and the graph, and make sure there are things that you can quickly summarize. More complicated charts, graphs, and visuals, like because you can't necessarily quickly summarize everything. Those can be put in real settings in the project proposal, a business plan, some sort of handout, right? That they can look at later after the presentation. Again, because again, you want to make sure that people can look at the visual aids, quickly take away what they need to take away from it so they're focused on you. All right. Yeah, you've bared with me so far. I appreciate it. Again, we're doing a really condensed crash course version here. So we got 2 more things to talk about real quickly, which is verbal and nonverbal delivery. All right, verbal delivery. What the heck's going on here? We're kind of focused on 2 things. There's like a substantive element of like, what are you trying to accomplish with your verbal delivery? And then there is a procedural element that your verbal delivery accomplishes, which is this thing called signposting. So the substantive element, what can you accomplish with your language? Now, you could break these out into more categories. Like you might have heard of something called the canons of rhetoric, and things like that. These are just things that I just think you should focus on, right? So, which is basically asking yourself, does the language, the words that I'm using, does it accomplish these things? It doesn't have to be in this order. It typically is, but it's a checklist, right? Is this happening? And technically, they're not always needed, like, especially the credibility one isn't needed for every subject. But here's the checklist. So, the first thing that your language can do is establish credibility. Again, that's credibility in you or credibility in the topic. So, ask yourself, do I lay out my credentials? Do I lay out why you should listen to me? Do I lay out why you should trust me? Do I say these things? Use your words, right? Um, and do I establish credibility in the topic if need be? If this is something that a lot of people don't naturally care about? Providing value. So this is basically, some of you are like, you need to work on this one, asshole. Jerk. Sorry, language. Um, you need to work on this, Brian. So providing value just means, are you giving them information that's useful to them, right? Now, remember I talked about, like when you're being informative, right? Have you brainstormed what's new, what's misunderstood, what's stuff that people haven't considered, right? Like in a certain context, or when you're being persuasive, are you really explaining how adopting this belief or behavior would be beneficial to them, right? So are you providing, what's the value I'm providing? What is the reason they will say yes? And by the way, a little quick note about this and just like a persuasion thing that again is like an important takeaway, a little nugget for you, little life advice, is a lot of times when people are focusing on persuasion, they tend to focus on what gets somebody to say yes, and not meaning like, what would be of value to them, right? So you should focus on that, right? And that's what we're talking about here. But you know, the thing you should also do in any situation when trying to persuade somebody, get them to change or maintain a belief or behavior, don't just ask yourself, don't just try to brainstorm, why do people say yes? Ask yourself, why do people say no? Especially if it's something that should be obvious, it should be intuitive that it's good for them. Why are they not doing it then? Why do people say no? Ask yourself that too. And that can give you more ways to create value. So don't just focus on the yes, focus why they're saying no too. Why have people not said yes, right? Um, and then inspiring action is just, what's the action step? If you're being informative, make sure you're telling them that your language accomplishes, telling them where they can learn more information or how to get more involved. If you're being persuasive, it's telling them what to do next, if they're persuaded to do what you're asking them to do. Now, the procedural part of verbal delivery is just this thing called signposting. And what signposting is using your delivery to emphasize your organization. And so, in other words, you are making statements that shows the audience the organization of your speech. An example would be a thesis statement. A thesis statement, like I mentioned, previews your topic and your main points. It tells the audience what the main points are. And also, because it typically ends your speech, it kind of signals to the audience, this is the end of my conclusion, right? We're now going to rock and roll here with the rest of our speech. So it does both. Using transition statements. We just talked about thing A, let's talk about B. We just talked about main point 1, let's talk about main point 2, right? That helps the audience see what matters, what's a main point, right? So that's why you want to use those things. And again, when you have those built in, they start to think you are more credible. Like, this dude must know, this guy or girl must know what they're talking about, because look at how organized they are, right? So there you go. Reference your visual aids. You can do this non-verbally, right? By simply referencing your visual aids as you switch main points, because again, you probably have a visual aid for each main point. You can even do this by asking the audience a question. So this is a transition sentence or statement that has built-in audience interaction. So let's say you've just talked about how something will make or save people money, and your next main point is how it will also make or save them time. It would be like if I asked the audience, I said, who would benefit if I shaved 10 hours off your work week, if this deals with their job? Or if I just told you how to gain 10 extra hours without losing anything of substance to you, right? Now, everybody's going to say, yes, I want 10 extra hours. Okay, 10 just free hours. And then you say, okay, great. Let's talk about how this will save you time. So it's a transition, right? And so these are ways to use signposts. You can also use signposts to, like, with your movement. So like you move across the room as you transition between main points. But again, this is just, it helps emphasize your organization structure with your audience. Okay, nonverbal delivery. Last little thing we got to cover. You've been a trooper. You've bared with me here. All right, so we're just talk about, again, some basics here: posture, eye contact, movement, things like that. So posture, what should you do in a speech? You need to stand upright, face the audience. Um, Place your arms to your side or on your hip, but not in your pockets or behind your back. Okay. Now, why should you not do that? This deals with basically a little bit about like psychology of our like just shared human experience through time. In that, I mean, this sounds really base. It's really base. Base is the right word. It sounds base and like basic, right? Like it's fundamentally like so. Look at it this way. Um, when you see a stranger, who is safer? Just physically safer? Somebody who you can see their hands, or somebody with their hands in their pocket or behind their back? Obviously, the person you can see their hands. No tools, no weapons, right? And there's a belief that, and by the way, there's research on this with audiences where if somebody's giving a speech and they're talking like this, where you can see my hands, open palms, open gestures, you are more likely, no matter what I say, to perceive what I'm saying as being truthful, authentic, and honest. Okay. And there's a belief that that just comes from like our shared evolution and history of experience, where we know no tools, no weapons, right? That this just, so in other words, in our psychology, just at a gut primitive level, we're like, oh, this person is safer, right? And so that's why you don't want to hide your hands, so to speak. I know that sounds like basic or simple, but there's just some truth to that, right? Like we know that. Like there's research with people. You show, for example, there's even studies like this where you can take an actor, you take an actor or an actress, so it's like they're giving a scene, so they deliver the exact same tone of voice and and message, but they just haven't changed their gestures. And if they give the scene, so to speak, to a group of potential customers or clients or investors, and they have open palms, that audience is way more likely to perceive them as honest if they do it with like their hands behind their back. So that's why kind of you want to do that. People will perceive you as more honest. I mentioned staying upright, take a step forward when others are talking. This conveys interest, and a step back when you respond. This is like a massive pro tip. It's like kind of an advanced level thing. But basically, if you take a step towards people, they perceive you as listening. So if you're giving a speech and you ask the audience a question, or the audience is asking a question, and while they're talking, if I take a step towards them and then I and make eye contact, show that I'm listening, then I take a step back when I respond, they're more likely to perceive that I was listening. So it's a subtle thing you can do to interact with your audience. So it just just like again, that's maybe a little too inside baseball, but just something to kind of think about. Eye contact. You want to make eye contact. People want you to look at them, as it turns out. Now this varies a little bit by culture, um, but a couple of things now that I'll sort of like keep in mind. So first of all, the reason what varies by culture is how much eye contact you should make, because there actually are some cultures where eye contact can be considered too abrasive or offensive, so you maybe want to potentially avoid it. But if we're just going to go off American culture, the reason you want to make eye contact is it helps people feel acknowledged, recognized, in the room, right? That you're like listening to them if they're asking a question, or just in a broader sense in the speech, just that you know they're there, right? They feel acknowledged. So that's what you want. You want to make as much eye contact with people as possible. You generally want to like make eye contact with people from different points in the room. So to make sure you're not just looking down the center or looking to the right or looking to the left. But the important takeaway here is there's something called the look away or the 10-second break, which basically just means you want to break up your eye contact. You don't want to stare people down for more than 10 seconds, because most research on audiences in American culture shows that they perceive that as abrasive or just something's off putting about that. So it's like an example, and again, this applies not just public speaking, but a lot of other settings. It would be like you're in a job interview and you're making eye contact with the interviewer, and you also, while they're asking a question, while you answer, you want to break it after 10 seconds, or they'll perceive you as like staring them down essentially. Now you could just look away really briefly and then re-engage, it's fine, but you do want to break it up every 10 seconds. It's like blink, right? You got to do more than blink, but you get the point. It's like you don't want to just be eyeballing them. So that's what you want to do. Now when it comes to eye contact, obviously this is one of those main things that makes people really nervous. It's hard to make consistent eye contact with people. So what should you do if you struggle with this? Well, a couple of things. You could pick points around the room to look at instead of looking at people directly. You just want to make sure those points are eye level. It's not going to work if you're just looking way in the back and it's obvious you're not actually looking at people, because you want to give the perception that you're looking at people. Uh, the more like professional way that this gets trained is do something called shrinking the audience. And what that basically just means is you pick out at the beginning of your speech like two or three people to look at, and you kind of just look at them. And so you pick somebody from the, again, they could, because they should be from different points in the room. You pick somebody from the middle, somebody from the right, somebody from the left, and you just look at them, right? And so instead of 20 people, you're now speaking to three. And if you want to be even better at this, what you would do is maybe pick three people for the first half of your speech, or two people for the first main point, and then you look at two different people the second main point, right? So that's an easier way to sort of manage eye contact. You got three types of gestures generally. You've got descriptive, which helps the audience compare and contrast or visualize a concept, right? If I say numbers fell last quarter, but they really rose up this quarter, right? I'm describing the situation with my hands. Prompting is trying to create a response, right? I say, show of hands, how many of you, blah, blah, blah. And emphatic is emphasizing what is being discussed. So this would be like, doing this kind of thing, like shaking your fist because you're angry. And there's a lot of research that shows that gestures actually really are very impactful. Okay. And I think it makes sense that they're impactful for a variety of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is they're one of the most noticeable things you can do in a presentation. Like, people might miss the eye contact. They might miss that you looked at them or didn't look at them. They might miss your facial expressions, but it's harder to miss gestures, right? Because they're more pronounced. So there's a lot of research that they really matter. There's also research into like some more specific ones. So I mentioned the talking with your open palms, and upwards tends to be perceived as expressing honesty. These are politicians. This is old though. I got to update this. Pressing your fingers together or talking with your fist with your thumb up. So like this, people then will tend to convey it as you're confident in what you're saying. I believe in what I'm saying, right? Or that you have some sort of authority with what you're talking about. Or talking like this, right? And the reason, by the way, I do have politicians is because they give a lot of presentations and they get trained to talk like this, right? They get trained to do this if they're in the public eye a lot, and also just presenters that have to give a lot of speeches. All right, movement. So you want to move across from during your transitions. So this would be like from your intro to your first main point, from your first main point to your second main point, from your second main point to your third main point. And that's because movement creates what's called an orienting response. So what an orienting response is that people pay attention to things that are unusual in their environment. So if you're moving around at these like strategic points, you're not just pacing, right? If you're just pacing at random, it loses its effect because people quickly realize, oh, that's just something you're doing at random. It doesn't mean anything. But if you're doing it and it's unusual, it doesn't happen a lot, it refocuses people's attention. And when should you refocus their attention? Because, and again, they're paying attention because it's unusual. You should refocus it when you're switching main points so they know what the main points are, right? So that's why you should move during those points. Another thing you could do to incorporate some movement, especially if you're just not necessarily super comfortable going all over the place, is discussing opposing sides, discussing them from different positions. So if you're doing like pro con or cause and effect, you could go over here to you do your intro, and then you move over here and you're like pro, and then you go con, and then you go pro, and then you go con, right, etc. So that's another thing you can do, or you could just move like first main point, second main point, right? That's the first movement I was talking about. Second, third. Another thing you could do is maybe you have to have the room set up for this, but if you, let's say you need to stay stationary, like let's say the room doesn't have a laser pointer where you can walk around and move the slides, or you have some notes that you're setting by a podium, which by the way you should avoid. I guess I should talk about that right here real quick. The last bullet, you generally want to avoid podiums because, excuse me, most research in audience shows that audiences generally perceive podiums as connotating authority, and in most real speeches it's not a win-lose situation. You don't want to feel like you're competing against somebody. There's a phrase in business and persuasion which is you want to get on the same side of the desk, which means people need to feel like you're a team, you're on their side, we're looking for a win-win. I'm not here to take advantage of you. I'm here to convince, to get you to do something that's helpful for you and helpful for me. And so I'm not like above you. And so that's the thing about podiums, right? And so generally audiences don't like that. So you should probably, if there's one in the room, like step to the side of it. But let's say you step to the side and you have your notes there or something like that. I've done that closing arguments with juries. So generally that's a way to kind of avoid them. But let's say you're in that situation. There's no laser pointer. You don't want to move a lot because you got your notes on the podium. Um, I mean, you should have note cards if possible. But if there, let's say just some reason you're kind of tied a little bit to that podium, one of the things you can do to add some movement though is to like stay there, but like maybe your first main point, you take a step towards the audience or a step or two, if the room allows, if you have enough room. And I mean, you don't want to get too close to them to make them uncomfortable, but if you can do that, and then you take a step back for your next main point or your next main point, right? So you could just do this and you stay close. And then you can also again refer to your visual aids as sort of that's another way to create the movement, right? Is if you're flipping the visual aids uh, in between in between main points. All right, last slide. You've made it to the very end of our crash course here. Make sure your initial body language suggests enthusiasm and sincerity. And so you want to make sure the nonverbals are good right away. You're starting out with a smile, you're making eye contact, you've got those honesty or confident gestures, right? Tone of voice is good. You sound authentic and sincere if we're going to go back to language, but make sure that nonverbals is really good right away. Now, why is that? Because people tend to judge you right away, right? They make a decision pretty quickly about you. And if you make that bad first impression, you're then fighting an uphill battle after that, right? And that's hard to do. So, and sometimes you can't, it's just hard to fix that. Sometimes you might not be able to. So make sure that starts out right away. And then lastly, you need to assess your body. And this is actually really important. This is like again, this is an important nugget here. Assess your audience's body language prior to speaking and during your presentation, and then look for statement changes. So here's the common mistake people make. They're giving their speech, and part of the things about body language is not just trying to use the right body language for you, but you should be analyzing your audience's body language, right? But they didn't bother to like check out what was it before I was talking. Now, why does that matter? Because body language is not inherently good or bad. It's only good or bad depending on what it is and if that's a reaction to something. So, in other words, if I just asked you what's bad body language, like I'll ask this in person classes, and everybody will say not making eye contact, slouching, crossing your arms, hands behind your pocket. We talked about this, right? Fidgety, right? Well, here's the problem. And this happens every time I'm in a live class. The majority of people, if not half of the people, uh, are sitting like that. Now, some of you are like, well, hey, doesn't that say something about you, Brian? Little shots fired. No, it doesn't say anything about me. It's never, hey, just like in my relationships, man, it ain't me. I'm not, I may be the common denominator, but I'm not the problem. Um, no, here's the deal. A lot of people naturally do those things, though. Most people slouch versus sit up straight, right? A lot of people naturally sit with their arms crossed. A lot of people put their hands in their pocket. There's people that bite their nails because they just bite their nails. They're not nervous. They're not fidgety. It's what they do, right? Some people just do this a lot. They touch their face a lot, right? So, in other words, those things are not bad. You know when they're bad? When their state changes. So, in other words, when I tell you, if I'm giving a speech and I say, will you buy X for $29.95? And right when I say the price point, then you do this and you break eye contact, that's when it's probably bad. That's when you do the defensive things, like literally closing off your body and not looking at me. That's bad, right? If the cop asks the suspect, they say, "Did you know the victim?" And they're like, "I've never met him. I don't know." You don't know them? You don't recognize this person? No. And then they say, "Then how do you explain why your fingerprints were found inside their apartment? Your DNA was found in their car, in the passenger side." And then they do this, now we got an issue, right? That's when they start getting fidgety. That's when they start touching their face, right? So, in other words, what we tend to consider as bad body language is not inherently bad. It's bad when it's a reaction to something important, right? So, you can only tell if something's a reaction to something important if you looked at how they behaved prior to you saying the important thing in the speech, right? Or in that moment. So one of the things you should do as a speaker early on is like look out before your speech, look at the audience, look at how people are sitting, look at how people are carrying themselves. and make a little mental note of that. And even more specifically, in real time, pay attention when you're saying those important things, right? That are key to that speech. How are they reacting to you? How are they reacting to that? Look for those state changes, and that can give you a way to get some feedback from them, to get a real sense, right, of how they're reacting to you. All right. So again, this was a really condensed version of public speaking. I tried to talk about a lot of the major issues, so hopefully you found this helpful. And I look forward to also hopefully seeing you guys in the next video.